Hello, and welcome to episode 2 of Behind the Bench with Neil Francis. I'm not Neil Francis, I'm Gary Hewitt, and I'm joined by John Donovan and, of course, Neil Francis. Good evening, gentlemen.
Good evening.
Good evening, guys.
Can I just ask, guys, when did we decide on that title and Franny getting headline billing?
Apparently me and you don't sell enough tickets. We had to have a marquee name.
And if we had it behind the bench with JD, it sounds like we were drinking or something like that. So,
okay, let's keep it
At a
professional.
testimonial of a Cardiff Rage game. So, we done a poll, and we came out with tough guys. So that'll be the topic for today. But firstly, gents, our first episode went out, the record breakers. What feedback have you got, John? Everyone seemed pretty happy with it on my Twitter account.
I saw some good stuff. I didn't keep across it comprehensively. I saw Kenwyn give the most detailed explanation ever of how the sound in his car was playing out. But no, it's for me, and I guess for you two guys as well, it was just nice to sit around and talk hockey, and you kind of forget that you're taping it.
it was good to see people echo that they'd forgotten bits that we brought up, and that season had a lot of good memories, and it was good that we've been able to stimulate those for people out there.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I seen that. Speaking of Kenwyn, actually, he found a highlight clip from a Steelers Devils game.
It wasn't highlight; it was 3 hours long.
But that's the kind of thing we want to do
Yeah.
on the social media. So any topic that we have and there's clips that can enhance what we've talked about, send them our way, and we'll put them out. We'll build a kind of the library of memories of episodes.
I want to see the clip again of the Super League winning year when the Devils were on the open tour bus and Franny has the long curly hair. Which
and we're led on the bus by Terry Echo, who's so intent on looking behind and waving, and he nearly hits about 5
he rides into traffic.
But there was another clip that was posted the other day with the celebrate. It was Ian Waters.
I saw that today.
Sponsor, with Spa, and he posted. I don't know what it was filmed on, but it was stuff I'd never seen before about like the immediate reaction to winning that league and the trophy presentation and stuff. So that was a good flashback.
It was.
So let's get right into it. Let's delve in to what has been a pretty crucial part of Devils history, really. The tough guy, Cardiff Devils synonymous over the years with some of the toughest players to have ever played in the UK. But Franny, we'll start with you. You've played with many a tough guy. You've played against many a tough guy. What makes a tough guy?
I think it's that willingness to do it and continue to do it, because it's not a nice role. I mean, anyone that's ever done the role will tell you, and you see a lot of players that are in the NHL that have done the role for many years that are suffering for it now. That as mean and as intimidating as they seem, those guys actually get nervous before games when they know they're going to go. There's been lots of documented stories about that. The build up to game, there's quite a bit of anxiety for them, but they still go out there and they put their neck on the line. And we only have to remember what happened to Tyson Marsh, who was a very, very tough guy in his own right, and he got popped with an unlucky one, and it has pretty bad consequences. So these guys, there's a mix of them, isn't there? There's guys that are total sort of teammates who will do anything for the team, that will stick up for the team, that have got your back, and we've had plenty of great guys like that. It's been a privilege to have teammates like that in Cardiff. But then there's quite a lot of them with a screw loose that enjoy getting hit in the face as much as they enjoy giving a punch. So there's a sort of wide range of guys on there, but there's a lot of wild characters that have been in the tough guy mold, but also some of the nicest guys that you'll meet away from the ice have been tough guys, and they are chalk and cheese from how they appear on the ice.
Absolutely.
John, I want to come to you with the question in regards to you were with the Devils from day one, watching the sport.
Yes.
When did the tough guy become a thing in Cardiff? Because I imagine those early seasons, maybe it wasn't as prevalent as it later became. When was it that you kind of realised that hockey in Cardiff had a market for these sort of folk heroes?
I think in the early seasons, and particularly with the 3 import rule, it was so crucial your imports were on the ice. But in the Division 2 season, there was a bench clearance, but we only had sort of 13 players, so I'm not sure we had a tough guy amongst them. So
it was a flyweight bench clearance.
It was a flyweight bench clearance. Grimsby Buffalo. So Shannon's first season. Shannon, I still think he's second in penalty minutes maybe to Brad Voth, and I think he took most of them in the first season because he wasn't quite accustomed to although he played for Peterborough before, he wasn't quite accustomed to refereeing over here. So I remember Shannon, I think it was a challenge game against Chelmsford where he was in the penalty box, got released from the penalty box, immediately hit somebody, and then went back to the penalty box again. But with the 3 imports, you wanted to keep your imports on the ice. So I'm not sure there was really the tough guy nature we see today, more akin to the NHL. I think probably the first big bad bully that I remember, who later became a Devils legend, was Mikey Ware. So when Murrayfield brought him in, he added a different dynamic to the British game.
Just following on from that quickly, when ice hockey launched in Cardiff, was it a well-known selling point that this was an aspect of the game? Because hockey was well known across the pond. Slapshot was 20 years old, or even 15 years old by the time hockey had launched in Cardiff. So was there a kind of education amongst the early fan base that this was something that was a lot different to, well, maybe not so much what was different to what was going on rugby pitches at the time?
Yeah, but I think John Lawless, aside from being a great player and all the stuff he brought to Cardiff, he did know how to market stuff. And I remember some of the early posters did say rugby on ice and that sort of thing. So I think,
and we did have Bill Taylor, didn't
we? Big Grizzly Bill Taylor,
Bill Taylor, who threw hits. And I think it must have been like an eye opener for those first fans. I missed that first season. I think I was in there in the second or maybe even the third season. But I certainly remember reading about Grizzly Bill Taylor and how he'd run people through the boards and all that. So I think that was maybe the first hint of how physical ice hockey could be and how that was a component of the game.
Absolutely, and it played to a Welsh audience, guys. And I think remember again, John Lawless used to talk about the fact that Cardiff City at the time, Cardiff Rugby, they were all outside winter sports. You could come in, sit in a dry environment and see these guys skating at 100 miles an hour, just banging into each other. And I think he was clever to not sell the violent side of it, but certainly John Lawless used to sell the physicality side of it. Yeah.
And if I remember rightly as well, that in those early years there was a couple of incidents. There was one where Lawless, I think, pulled the team off the ice and they got fined.
That was in Telford, yeah. Brian Canowisher and John. Yeah, it was 9, and Shannon got stick behind the net.
Yeah, and he pulled the team off the ice.
Jim Taylor was referee,
and shortly, probably the next year from that, we signed Paul Heavey, who was probably maybe the earliest tough guy for the Devils. He was the big blue liner that's.
Well, and I know we're going to get into this later. We talk about tough guy. I always think from middleweight, Stephen Cooper was a huge tough guy, and
absolutely.
And I think Shannon could handle himself, but Heavey, and you talk about first rivalries, and it's all coming back now. Chuck Taylor was probably the first big bad guy for the Telford Tigers. Yeah, there's so many people we could mention.
Well, we'll try and get through as many as we can. Finally, when you started, and you first break into the pro ranks, the Devils, and you're getting your first few extended runs in the team, was it something you thought about that this might be on the horizon, or did you just have that kind of blind enthusiasm of just playing and if it was going to come, it was going to come? What kind of, was it laying on your mind at all?
Early on when I was playing, I started playing at 12, and I think my first game for the Devils was 16 or maybe just hit 17. Up to that point, I was like a really clean player. In fact, I always remember getting caught with elbows in the head because, I wouldn't go in with it. I would try and make as fair a check as I could as possible. But then when you get up into the sort of professional game, I was trying to make those hits that I was making then. And, we had face cages on, and that is, the red rag to the bull. Yeah. For older players out there, because they see, especially the way I used to play, is that I was a fast skater.
Yeah.
I wanted to impress, all the enthusiasm, and I was finishing every hit. And there's nothing an older veteran guy, hates more than being hit by this young kid in the face cage. It used to drive me wild because people say, you're only running around because you got a face cage. But I didn't have a choice but to wear the face cage.
Yeah, that's the rules.
And you get popped with so many elbows in the head. And I remember, my jaws used to absolutely kill from where you get smashed in this face cage. But you had to be a lot more savvy at that level because, you know, the players that you're playing against had been there, seen it, done it, and dealt with it before. So I think I always knew that at the top level that I was never going to be the most skilled guy. I knew I could skate really well, and I was always ranked lower down than the other prospects. So you had guys like Simon Keating, James Manson, Lee Carson, you know, Robbie Hill, Hugh Jenkins, all those that were ranked ahead of me. So I knew if I wanted to, if I wanted to be noticed and to try and get ahead of them, then I had to bring something different. And I tried to do that by playing a bit more physical.
Absolutely.
So when was your first fight in Devils colours? Can you remember it?
Yeah, I think I can. It was, I think the Backseat Posse days, for those who can remember those. So there was, you know, me, Keats.
That's an episode coming up.
Richard Townsend and Mance and
Sean
and Cass and Wardy. And we'd had a shift and we'd been out there banging, and, you know, Cardiff fans love seeing the homegrown guys out there giving it their all. Very, you know, I think it was a nation we're proud, aren't we, of Welsh guys sort of coming through. And we'd been out there for a shift and we'd ran around a little bit, and I'd gone for a line change and I could hear a big roar, and next thing I look back and there's Keats is tangled up in the netting with somebody and it's all kicking off there. So I double backed from the bench, skated as hard as I can and just jumped the first guy that I saw and got in there. And that was actually my first time getting thrown out of a game as well. So
third man in, or?
Yeah, I think it was third man in, but it all came first fight and first time I'd been thrown out. So
I guess it wasn't so bad. You had a few more afterwards.
Yeah. I mean, I probably asked for a few more than I got because, I mean, I was, you know, part of my role was to try and get under guys' skin, and you know, if they were smart enough, they wouldn't take that trade because it wasn't a good trade for them. But eventually, you can wear some guys down, or you can do something that's going to make people react, and you know that's something I think I brought to the table.
Absolutely, yeah.
You mentioned something a few minutes ago, John, which we're going to circle to. We're obviously going to talk about the big personalities of Brad Voth, Mike Ware, these sort of larger-than-life characters, almost sort of mythical creatures.
Yeah.
But in terms of entertainment, I guess you can say, and I know it's an area of the sport that's maybe going towards extinction rather than anything else, but you mentioned middleweights, guys who maybe didn't make their living throwing knuckles, but some of the most entertaining fights I've seen as a fan have been through just two guys who have ended up disliking each other. Can you give us a kind of broad overview of what you consider to be a middleweight and why you think that's so entertaining?
I think to kind of take the last part first, why it's entertaining. Todd mentions a few things. Well, he mentions a lot in the Q&A, but one of the things he touches on a lot about fighting is he likes. He thinks fighting still has a part in the game if the fights happen organically, and I tend to think they happen more organically at a middleweight level. Guys who aren't predisposed to going out there thinking they're going to have a fight, but something happens during the game, as you say, crashing the net or a big hit or something like that, or you're just trying to get your team going, and sometimes the middleweight rink rats will do that. And I just like some of the matchups that happens at middleweight. You don't get a lot of maybe so much of the clutch and grabbing, maybe because these guys aren't so schooled in fighting. They actually try and get punches away. And I just think back to the middleweight tilts. There are some middleweights who I consider good technical fighters, people like Stephen Cooper, people like Jared Adams, but
I'll throw Frank Evans into that. I absolutely loved having Frank Evans as a teammate and loved watching him. He's a guy that was just fearless, and you could just see any incident he was first in, and he was ready to go, and he could more than handle his own against a lot bigger guys.
I remember Frank Kovacs, he fought a couple of times at Sheffield, and I remember, and I know you just list all of them, I really enjoyed was it Mike Perpich against Kevin Bergin in the Big Blue Tent. That was a good
Perps is a guy I think, had he not had that knee injury early on, would have gone on to be a Devils legend, because he had that old school mentality, didn't he? He had that grit to his game, and he wasn't afraid to shy away from fights, and he was technically an excellent fighter.
So that's the thing with me middleweights. I think I would say I'm more of a fan of skill hockey than aggressive fighting hockey, and you know, you pick your poison, and we all like the game for different reasons. But of course, you're going to get out of your seat when you see a fight happen, and I get excited about those fights that are, as Todd says, organic. And I think that happens more at middleweights than maybe it does at the heavyweights, because there's an expectation the heavyweights are going to fight, whereas the middleweights it comes out of the game.
Sticking with this sort of middleweight theme for a second, Franny, is there anyone who was possibly middleweight stature, but I know you mentioned Frank Evans, but a heavyweight mentality in terms of that was their role, kind of like a Ty Domi, I guess. Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, maybe you've played against them.
I'd say in the league, the guy that immediately springs to mind is Paul Ferrone. Up in Newcastle. Mm-hmm. You know, the guy was probably my size. I mean, a lot more jacked, obviously. But oh my God, he would go against any legit tough guy, and it didn't matter if they had 6, 7, 8 inches in height on them and the reach, but he was so strong. You know, he'd throw bombs, you know, he'd grab on, he'd pull them in close, and he would just throw bombs. And for me, he was pound for pound the toughest there's been.
One thing I want to touch on is possibly one of the most entertaining and unusual visuals in sport is a bench clearance.
Yeah,
it doesn't really happen in any other sport where you've got all this equipment flying everywhere and everything's going on. But Freddie, you seem to attract them, to be honest. You've been involved in pretty much everyone that the Devils have had. Is it a little bit frightening out there when it starts? Because there's only there were only 3 officials for all of the previous bench clearances, and you've got a lot of big guys who maybe now don't have a filter, and that testosterone's going, the crowd is going absolutely crazy. What's the thing in it? Because I imagine, you know, everyone afterwards says, "Oh, what fun! Like, that was great, like brilliant." If everyone comes away unhurt,
yeah.
But I imagine in the midst of that, there's got to be a time where you're thinking, "Oh dear."
I think at the time, your adrenaline is just pumping it through, and you know, I mentioned before about, you know, be it leading up to games, there's, you know, a bit of anxiousness. If you know it's going to be a physical game, and you know the likelihood is you're going to get into a fight. But something that happens sort of spontaneously like that, probably the adrenaline's going through. I think maybe I'm saying I wasn't as intimidated because I was always on tough teams. So we always had, you know, more often than not, tougher teams than than the opposition. I remember being in a bench brawl for the Rage back in, you know, those days, and it kicked off. And we had a very young side, and I was one of the oldest guys at like 21 or 22. And I remember that being pretty scary because, you know, I might have been fighting with one guy, and then you're getting suckered from behind by somebody else, and then you're like, okay, there's no one here to bail me out. What's going to happen here? But in the, you know, the bench brawls I was in for the Devils, it was, I think we were loving it at the time. It was, especially like I say, we had tough teams, and it was, you know, very much a kind of testosterone fuel thing, like you said, and you know, we ended up, I think, you know, on top in the couple that I can certainly remember, and I think it was quite exciting.
Is there like a get together in the locker room, you know, after a night out when everyone's like, what did we do last night, and everyone pulls together information?
Everyone's got their own story, because you can only really see what's going on in front of you, and you're getting glimpses and other things, and I mean that's a good bus trip home if that's happening, where everyone's telling their story.
Who was the guy who was like, I had 3 of them, I dealt with them easy?
Oh God, I don't know.
Probably Waffy, because probably Waffy did, didn't he?
Most famous bench clearance, John.
Nottingham?
I would say that's probably, was it the first?
It wasn't, because the first one, as I said, because I'm old and boring, the first Devils one I remember was in the Division 2 playoffs against Grimsby Buffalo, and I said we only had sort of 13, 14 men, and I remember a guy called Max Thurgood was sort of hitting 2 people at a time. But no, the Nottingham one, 94, 95, that really sort of resonates. It was a big game. We had a rivalry all year with Nottingham, and I still maintain Nottingham should have won the league that year. They had a great team with Brabant, Garth Primark. There was a lot of good people on that team. Blaisdell's coach, Mario Bolonge, was there. But they lost it in the last 5 or 6 weeks, and Sheffield won the league. And the last game of the season between Cardiff and Nottingham was to get second place. And we were behind all game, and we pegged them back. And I know it's something you're going to talk about later, Gaz, about incidents that maybe didn't get punished as they should. Whilst the bench clearance happened, so you think this incident did get punished, I still to this day would love to get hold of Ross Lambert for what he did to Dougie McEwen. Just pummeling Dougie McEwen across the blue line, and Dougie was the best player in the league that year by a country mile. And then it all kicked off, and I remember Blaisdell and Lawless just looking at each other, and are we going to send the guys out? And when the bench is cleared, and as you say, it must be adrenaline, but scary for a player, for a fan. It's just fantastic viewing, and guys who you don't necessarily think are tough will then show that. Like I remember in that bench clearance, Claude Dumas was fighting and getting involved, and you've mentioned Simon Keating. He went nuts in that bench clearance, and that was a great
I was
night.
actually injured for that when I just had shoulder surgery. So if you look back at the video of that, and it goes to a part on the bench, and I'm stood there, and I've got one arm in a sling, and I think Keats and Towns are going. They're obviously my line mates.
Yeah.
We always had each other's backs. And there's one point you can see my arm just go above the bench and hold on to whoever's shirt it was, because I think Keats was letting them rain, and so I was still trying to play my part, even if I had one arm and I was off the ice. But yeah, that was. I think Stephen Cooper stepped up in that one.
Stephen Cooper stepped up, and one of the things I remember from that is the two guys you probably would have loved to have been involved. Heaves had retired that year and was assistant coach, and you could see him on the bench.
I think he had a stick in his hand.
I think, trying to get the Brabant, and then Jamie van der Horst was playing for the Devils that year, and he was out injured at the time, and he was trying to get involved as well. So there was a lot of pent-up aggression, but that was a great night. Brian Cox was fighting with Jason Wood, and
we've got to mention, because I know Woody will probably listen to this. Yeah. Brian Cox did hit Woody in the face with Woody's own helmet, not with Brian Cox's mask, but
the ultimate insult.
He grabbed Woody's mask off his head and clocked him around the head and cut him. And Woody's never lived it down. And we spoke about it the other week when Woody was over for a game. And in fact, I think every time I see Woody, that comes up.
Yeah, absolutely.
Was that the game that we talked about, kind of why Cardiff loves a tough guy?
Yeah. Was
that incident a big part of that, really? Because my first full season was the first Super League year.
Yeah.
So I missed this, but people even then were like, it was quite a big talking point. It was kind of a big sell to me, as like, stuff like this happens.
Well, I think it's just when something, it's a physical game anyway, but when something above and beyond and out of the ordinary like that happens, and it's 23 years later, and I'll still watch the YouTube clip, a couple of times a month, and I think, I don't know a guy we're going to reference tonight, but I think someone who did a lot for growing the tough guy notion in Cardiff was maybe that first homegrown tough guy, and I'd probably give that honour to Nicky Chin. And I think at that time Nicky Chin was a tough guy, particularly that punch on Mike Rowe, which
that's the famous one, isn't it?
Yeah.
Chinny was in his cage. Mike Rowe was one of the toughest guys in the league. He was a tough guy in North America. He played mean, didn't he? Played the role, and he'd had Nicky Chin running around, and he thought he's gonna school him. And then I remember Chinny cocking his arm back, and bang, he drops Mike Rowe, which was legendary. And
it was a face-off game. It was on the TV program, and Paul Ferguson, who I always say, I'm not a great commentator, but I steal all my good lines off Paul Ferguson. I remember watching it on the Monday night with my dad, and Paul Ferguson, you expect him maybe to say, there's no place for that in the game, and Paul Ferguson just goes, well, that's one of the nicest punches I've seen in a long
time. Nicky Chin, we just touched on him, middleweight or heavyweight?
Back then, probably a heavyweight, because you didn't have the the huge guys. But in reality, compared to the size on players today, he's probably a middleweight. Yeah. But very, very strong guy. Was strong from an early age, and didn't mind throwing it about. And he was. We've talked before about him being a big game player.
Yeah.
But he would definitely show up when it counted.
Oh, absolutely.
couple of Coventry bench brawls, isn't there?
Yeah.
My favourite ever one was Coventry away, and it was before they had the barriers between the two benches.
Yeah.
It's the reason there's
it's
barriers.
the reason yeah. I mean, it's crazy to think that there wasn't one, but it's the reason why they
Yeah.
built now the full barrier. And there'd been a few fights in the game. I think Wesley and Ivan had been thrown out already. We had Dennis Maxwell on the team, and he'd fought Slender and Gareth Owen even.
Gareth Owen,
maybe,
yes.
and you know, so he was stirring it up, and then there'd been a fight. I think Tomo had been yelling to him.
Yeah.
And, we had a guy helping with our equipment, Stefan Ziedeutsch.
Yeah.
And he was on the bench, and he gets involved too. But it just all kicks off on the ice. And I remember Frank Evans was actually on Coventry. And Ed Patterson, who was again another very underrated tough guy. I think he more or less suckers Frank, and he starts going to town on it. I remember Frank having a big welt on his head and not being very happy about it. And then it's all kicked off. And I remember being on the bench, and Ivan and Mike had come out the dressing room, and they were kind of wrestling with guys there, and where's his arm is going, and Cugnett was actually backup for that game, because I think again
did Brabs play?
Yeah, I think Brabham had played, because I think that was... I remember Frank having a big welt on his head and not being very happy about it. And then it's all kicked off, and I remember being on the bench, and Ivan and Mike had come out the dressing room, and they were kind of wrestling with guys there, and where's his arm is going, and then Cugnett is by the thing, and next thing, and he was a tough guy. I mean, we all remember him stepping in against Cornish when the racers were running round, and you know, I think Cornish was trying to go with Stoney, and then Cugnett steps in all his goalie gear.
Stick across him,
But he's going with someone, and then there's a few of us. I remember Mance was there, and it was me, and I can't remember who else was with Phil Hill. And we started like edging towards this bench. And next thing we know, we're like literally in the middle of Coventry's bench, and there's all kinds going on. There's just punch. You just don't know who was hitting you, who was getting hit. It was just absolute mayhem.
But that wasn't a bench clearance, was it? That was
ice.
It was.
Yeah,
when you watch the footage of that,
Yeah. That was actually a question from Ryan Bodman on Twitter about that ice clearance in Coventry. You mentioned Maxwell and Tomo going at each other. Can you remember what they said? I think Tomo had been yelling at Maxwell, and I know you won't believe Tomo was yelling at me, but yeah, he was yelling at Maxwell, because I don't think... Maxie was obviously looking for a fight, and he was spoiled. The game had been boiling over anyway. A couple of guys had been thrown out, so you know he's already fought like a young guy. And Gizmo actually did really well in that one, because he was just one of those wiry guys that was hard to put down, and that probably frustrated Maxie. So then Maxie ends up a fight with, I think it was Slender, who again was pretty tough. I think then Tomo had lost his rag at this point, and he's yelling at Maxwell. So then Maxie was never one to back down from anything like that. So he was basically offering the whole bench on. We had a way tougher team than them, and you could see that they were getting very intimidated. So that's when Maxwell is virtually on their bench, you know, and then that's when somebody has to grab him, and then as soon as one guy gets grabbed, then you know that was the ignition to light it off. And the other bit I remember, I didn't see it at the time because I think I was on Coventry's bench at the time. But you know, I remember hearing about it and then watching the video after. And Jeff Brown, who was about 6'3", 220 pounds, has taken Tom Watkins' helmet off and was beating him over the head with it on our bench. You can see it in the
And
video.
you can just see the helmet coming up and whack, whack. And it was just the weirdest thing ever to do to somebody, especially when you're that much bigger than them.
But I mean, what's crazy about that ice clearance was it was kind of a catalyst for Coventry's season the year after, because the next week was the playoffs, and Tomo was banned for not controlling his bench. And we blitzed them 4-0 in the WNIR. And Tomo was sat in block 8. I don't know who advised him to sit in block 8, but well, put it this way, he had a lot of locals rubbing his face in it. And the year after, he built a team to just absolutely slaughter us.
His answer was Payet.
That season, you could tell in every Coventry Cardiff game that I think he held that last ice clearance pretty close to his chest. And,
that playoff game was won the weekend before, because they were. I knew some guys on Coventry, And if they could have given us the game 5-0 before, they would have happily not come down.
Yeah.
And we knew it, so it definitely done its job in terms of the intimidation factor. But like you say, he responded the next year in signing Payet, who single-handedly beat us all the way until I think we then signed John Craighead, and then Craighead fought him 3 times, and Craighead was a super, super tough guy.
Yeah.
But up to then, I remember Payet would run round and hit somebody really badly early on, no response, because we didn't have a tough. That's probably
that whistle team
was the whistle team. It was the softest team.
So it was good. It was a skilled team, but there was no toughness there.
It didn't have your prototypical Cardiff Devils team with the toughness in there, and they took full advantage of that and totally had our number.
And Rob Davison, although a good player, he didn't really step up to maybe play the role
until Cullen got hit by
Perron.
Oh, I think we have to touch on that now. We brought it up.
Why not?
For anyone who doesn't know, Mike Perron was a particularly distasteful Sheffield Steelers player.
I think one that you'd like on your side, but hate if he's against you. And he definitely played that sort of rat role very well, didn't he? And got under skin, and he stepped over the line, he got reactions, and he made a particularly bad hit, didn't he? On the
awful hit.
He did, and I still haven't forgiven him, so I would have him nowhere near my team, and I still hope and pray that someone exacts revenge. But Rob Davison certainly reacted first and managed to get him, and I've never seen someone rip a bit of plexiglass in two, but as they're both in the penalty box, Rob Davison very clearly shouts over the glass, "You've got no effing balls." And as Perron kind of creeps towards the glass thinking he's safe, he rips it in two. Like that is brute strength from a guy who played in the NHL. Franny, I've got to ask you, at the time Ed Patterson had a pretty major shoulder surgery and his arm was in a sling, and I think he was out for the year at this point. I think he's told the story himself about trying to get into the locker room once Perron had been sent there in the previous break. Do you remember anything about that?
Vaguely, no, you mention it, but Ed was a guy that, like I said before, he was very underrated tough. He also had that switch as well, and when he lost it, he was nasty. I remember, just going off topic for a second, but I remember in the playoff finals, we needed a bit of a boost, and he kicked our centreman out of the draw and just went in and stick their centreman right in the face off the draw, just to kind of send a message. But
Dutium. Not Todd Dutium.
Mark Dutium, so just stick him straight in the face just to get a reaction. But I think he would have one-armed. I would have fancied Ed Patterson against Perron on that night because he was that vexed about what happened to Cully. Cully was a skilled guy,
He was.
a very small guy, there wasn't much to him. And he was probably the dirtiest hit that we've seen. And like I said, Ed Patterson with one arm against Mike Perron. When that fuse had gone, I backed Patterson.
Oh, absolutely.
Let's talk about Mike Ware. John, you mentioned that he was probably the first guy to come over to British shores and be the man who was earned his living off of being the protector, the enforcer. He's certainly one of the first ice hockey players I saw as a child that I went, wow, that guy is larger than life. For you, John, one of the most influential Devils players that you've seen in terms of what he brought, what were your thoughts on Mikey Ware as a Devil and opponent?
Well, first of all, as an opponent, it was always box office the couple of years that Mike Ware was at Murrayfield, and I should say Mike Ware was throughout his career, both Heineken League, Super League, also a very good player. I remember that Murrayfield team. You had guys like Chris Palmer, Tony Hand, John Newbury,
Jim Mollard.
A lot of
legendary side when you put Hand and Scott Neal.
Absolutely, and there's times where Murrayfield should have won the league, but they didn't because perhaps they always had a discipline problem. And Mike Ware could put up in the old Heineken League days. He could put up 100 points a season. But you knew you could get under his skin, and it was box office. And we talked about Chinny before. I remember a game where Chinny basically took it upon himself to get under Mike Ware's skin and took him out of the game. And Mike Ware shot a puck at Rick Rabant's head, and I know some other people might have thought about doing that. I should put in my disclaimer that I'm a huge Rick Rabant fan. But Mike Ware was box office. You always knew something was going to happen. And when he signed for the Devils, obviously just gave you presence. But it was really interesting how quickly, because Heaves was a tough guy, but Lawless made him captain to I think, kind of all that passion to try and harness it in a good way. And it was interesting that Heaves did exactly the same thing to Mike Ware, making him captain when Stephen Cooper left. And the first year he could play as a winger. He played on a line with Machulik and Randy Smith, and he put up points. And then he moved back as a defenseman. So he was multi-talented. But I don't think I've ever seen a guy, to sort of round this all off, you can tell when the red mist came down, he didn't care. I think he tried to beat up his brother Greg one time to get to a player when Greg was trying to restrain him. When the red mist came down, it really came down on Mikey Ware.
Yeah, he was the scariest opponent that I've played against. I remember, you said he shot a puck at Rick Brabant. I remember him absolutely dummying Keats in the head, and when Keats was on the floor, still doesn't know what day of the week it is, and he shot a puck at him as well. And it's funny, they ended up becoming really good friends when he was down in Cardiff. So I said before that Mike Ware is one of the nicest guys that you can get off the ice. Just an absolute heart of gold. But on the ice, that's exactly what you said, John. He had that red mist, and you knew when the red mist had come down, there was no stopping him. There was no stopping him. There was that fight up in Sheffield with Chinny again.
Yes.
Chinny definitely got under the skin of Mike Ware, and Chinny had a fight with Greg, and it was going all right, but Mike just lost his mind, and Heaves was hanging off the back of him. Now, Heaves is a big guy. There was there was Heaves and two players hanging off the back of Mike Ware on the benches in Sheffield, and he still managed to get over the bench. He gets to the fight. The linesmen are hanging off his back. He's still going, and then I think the goal had been pushed. The net has been pushed off, and he's like going through the net, and he's pulling all these people around the ice, still trying to get to Chinny. It was just, once he had it in his mind, I don't even think. I think he just blanks out.
I think he does, because in that fight, Stephen Cooper's captain that year, and he's trying to say to Mike, "Calm down." I don't think Mike Ware's even aware that Stephen Cooper is in front of him.
I don't think he knows he's on his team at that
point. But he was box office.
Yeah, definitely. I remember I didn't play this year, but I remember Keats ringing up Mike Ware, and it was just after Mike Ware had knocked out Dennis Vial. So Dennis Vial, one of the better resumes of tough guys to come over, particularly in the Super League era, and they'd had a bit of a spat going on, and they had a fight up in Sheffield, and Mike throws an absolute perler and knocks him out, and Vial cannot get up. He's Bambi legs and everything. Keats rings him up the next day, and he's like, "Hey, Mike, how you doing? How was the game last night?" Yeah, I was okay. Anything happened? No, it was okay. It was okay. He's like, "I heard you knocked out Vial," and he's like, "Yeah." He's like, "What? When are you going to tell me?" He's like, "Well, you know what? Sometimes you knock someone out, sometimes you get knocked out. That's the way it is in fighting." And that's as level-headed as he was, And you could see by the way he fought. He was very open, wasn't he, when he fought? He was literally throwing.
He was swinging. Yeah.
No defence whatsoever. His chin was right up there. And you do see videos of Mike Ware getting buckled.
Yeah.
He's a 6'6" guy. He wasn't necessarily the biggest, frame on him.
No.
But 6'6". And he would fight with his chin out there. Sometimes he gets popped and he drops to his knees. I mean, he normally gets back up and starts throwing again. Other times he's connecting and he's dropping people. Yeah. But he was very humble about it too. There was no way he was bragging about anything like that, because he knew that he was one punch away from a knockout as much as he was there knocking out guys like Vial.
We left and went to Sheffield. As a young Devils fan, my first real hockey heartbreak that was.
Yeah.
But then shortly after, Mike Macwilliam comes in as the replacement, and talk about kind of being the perfect replacement, I guess, when you're talking for like, guys leaving and guys coming in. It was a tough role to fill, John, for Macwilliam with Ware leaving. At least that's kind of how I read it. But he filled it. What are your thoughts?
He did. Well, I'm going to be in a minority of one. Cause I liked Mike Macwilliam the second year of his 2-year contract. I thought the first year There's no doubt he was tough, and I should say I dealt with Mike a little bit when we were putting the Legends game together.
Well, dealt with him as in you sorted him out, or?
Well, you know, much like Mike Ware, I don't like to brag. No, when I was involved with Shannon and a few others organising the Legends game a few years ago, dealing with Mike, he was a perfect gentleman. Off the ice, I think he was a born-again Christian, and he used to donate toys to needy causes and what have you. But I remember when Mike Ware left, we didn't sign Mike Macwilliam till sort of 6 or 7 weeks into the season, and he was brought in initially as a defenseman, and he was brought in at the same time as a guy called Tony Cicelli, and I really liked Tony Cicelli, and Macwilliam I don't think had the foot speed or mobility to necessarily play as a defenseman, so I wasn't a huge fan of his the first season. And I also thought he could take a cheap penalty. I thought he was a tough guy, but I thought he could. But the second season, when he went on a line, I think with Merv Priest and Nicky Chin, that was a horrible line to play against. And you know, Franny's going to mention in a minute. He had a classic rivalry with a guy from Ayr, and I thought the second season he was controlled. He did it when he needed to do it. He also showed his hockey skills. I remember a couple of goals. I think live on Sky, one maybe a Challenge Cup in Nottingham, one against Bracknell. I think the second season I was far more of a fan of Mike Macwilliam, and yeah, there's no doubt he was tough, and I don't think the door at the 9X Arena has ever recovered from when Mike Macwilliam put his stick through it.
It also hasn't been called the 9X Arena since that day either.
It hasn't. Well, I'm stuck in a time warp, guys, you know that.
But the earliest thing I remember about the name Mike Macwilliam was that he was pretty excited when he got his signature. He'd signed him, and we were in the Wales National Ice Rink at the time. We used to go down to Savini's for breakfast pretty much after every practice, and he's going in there and he's like, hey, we've just signed a guy, he's like mega tough, you know, like nobody's going to touch him over here, which I think he was right.
Absolutely.
And I said, how come he's coming over now, you know, why wasn't he here earlier? And he's like, he's coming off an injury. He's just had shoulder surgery, and I was like, ooh, that's a bit, you know, for a tough guy, shoulder surgery. And I've had both my shoulders done the same thing. But he was just saying, oh no, he's quite excited about his shoulder surgery because they've shortened his ligaments a little bit, which he said has tightened it up. It gives him that bit extra spring. So when he takes his arm back, he's actually got a bit more spring to come into his punches. So that, along with the plate in his hand that he's got,
God, yeah.
it actually, he's pretty excited about getting going this year. And I just thought, okay, this will be interesting. and it was. And you know, Mike Macwilliam, I don't think he got beat over here, did he?
I don't think so. I think
maybe there was a few honourable draws along the way.
I
for
remember
people, but
when we hosted the Continental Cup, there was a big Slovakian guy over it, you know, and he had some. But no, he
I
was nuts.
remember on that Continental Cup game because he got his shirt, he got his arms tangled up in his shirt somehow, and then you could see him like moving around like Mel Gibson in Lethal Weapon. And next thing you see, this arm comes from under his shirt, so he's managed to take his arm out of his sleeve under his shirt, so this big guy, Slovakian guy, thinks he's got Mike Ware tied up. The next thing, this arm comes from underneath and just pops him, and I've never seen a cut like it. He literally cut him the length of his forehead,
He was
and the guy was, it was bleeding everywhere. And
again, that Continental Cup, I remember there was, whether it's the same game or one of the other two teams, but I think perhaps it was the same game. Macwilliam knocks a guy to the ice, and the guy thinks about getting up, and Kip Noble just looks at him and goes, "Oh, you don't want to do this."
You said that Mike was the most intimidating guy you played against. How intimidating was Macwilliam?
Again, he was one of those that had the fuse, didn't he? You know, he had that look in his eyes that, you know, nothing was going to stop him once he wanted it, and yeah, I mean, he was on our side, so everybody was a foot taller, like you were with Mike Ware, like you were with Brad Varth, and you know, all these great guys that we've had, but. You know, Mike Macwilliam for his era is probably the toughest guy I would say around there. So I mean, you just saw that look in his eyes that not many people would mess with him. But you know, we talked about a great rivalry. There's one guy that kept coming back for more and more, which was Matt Hoffman up in Ayr. He wasn't a small guy himself, but I was just amazed time after time that how he volunteered to get into, because they normally didn't. It didn't fight in scrums or anything. It was always off the face. It was like those guys, those guys wanted each other, and I listened to a podcast with Macwilliam on the other week, and he said there's tough guys that he thought that because he's doing his job, and they were actually, he knew they were good guys, and he said that guy we didn't like each other, plain and simple, didn't like each other, and you could see it in the fights, because there's some fights like you can say you're doing it for the team and your team needs a spark. Those guys, it was personal. And it rarely happens like that, but for those guys it was personal. They just couldn't get enough of fighting each other.
Do tough guys in the locker room keep that to themselves? Like, I know there's bound to be games where they know that week leading up, I'm going to take this guy. We've had Schulte and Mike Ware, for example, going at each other in the press. It's going to happen. Hoffman and William just kept the fights coming. Do they vocalise that, the guys in the locker room?
Not really. Normally the ones that vocalise it are the ones that aren't so tough, and the ones that end up not actually fighting. They'll talk about it but don't do it. And the really tough ones just go out there and do it and don't even get anyone else involved, because it can be a distraction if you've got that that anticipation of a big fight or whatever. It can be a distraction in the dressing room. So the good tough guys will just do it when the time's right, and not talk about it.
I remember, just to finish on Mike Macwilliam, I remember his last ever game for the Devils was a playoff final winning game against Nottingham when Machulik scored those 2 goals, and I remember the South Wales Echo article a couple of days later, so I'm guessing Terry Phillips would have wrote it, and Mike Macwilliam said, well, my body can't play any more hockey. It was the greatest note to finish on, so I think he went on to Penarth Pier and just threw all of his hockey equipment into the sea there. So after a couple of hours I found it all. But no, he, as I say, initially as a defenseman, I wasn't following Mike Ware. I wasn't too sure. He was very, very tough. He was very, very scary. And I think in that second year playing as a winger, he gave protection. Someone like Merv Priest, who I didn't realise had the hockey skills that he had, and I think maybe playing on a line with Mike Macwilliam, that protection allowed someone like Merv Priest to show off the fact he was a good stick handler and what have you. So there's no doubt you play taller than a guy like Mike Macwilliam's on your team.
So that's the end of part 1 of Tough Guys. And I'm sure you'll agree, some great anecdotes there in part 1. Coming up in part 2, McMorrow and all the stories associated with his time in the UK. Another Coventry bench clearance. This one started by Neil Francis, and he'll tell you exactly how he managed to do that. And all the talk around Brad Voth and his influential time in a Cardiff Devils jersey. Thank you ever so much for listening once again. Part 2 will be online for you next week. We hope you enjoyed part 1. There's more to come, I assure you. Keep connecting with us on Twitter at BTBFranny. And tell us what you like, tell us what you don't like. We're always open to all sorts of suggestions as we grow and learn in this new podcasting realm. But for now, thank you very much for listening, and we'll be back next week with part 2 of Tough Guys.